This video on media policy contextualizes the topic of how to approach media policy in a global historical framework. In essence, what we're going to be doing is talking about a couple of historical examples that really illustrate how the media policy question directly relates to the big political conflicts, global political conflicts that have shaped the world over the last half century or so. And our purpose in doing this is to talk about or to cultivate an understanding that when we're studying cultural policy, when we're studying media policy, we're actually studying something which has enormous influences on the world, on global politics and how power operates in that. So, one of the reasons why global media policy at this particular historical juncture is clearly very, very important can be summarized by some of the actions that we see in the Trump presidency. So, one of the things that we've seen is that US President Donald Trump has withdrawn America from UNESCO. UNESCO is a United Nations organization which, since shortly after the end of the Second World War, has been responsible for promoting educational and cultural exchange throughout the world. The argument is in that exchanging culture and teaching opportunities, different countries can learn to understand each other better, and that has benefits for global peace. And it's worth noting that media policy has been an important part of UNESCO's activities, both talking about how nations may create and coordinate media policy and thinking about how that policy is related to important things like the capacity of cultures to tell their own stories and create their own values. So UNESCO is a body that really encapsulates how media policy is something that addresses the very important political questions that shape international global politics. And what we know is that Donald Trump has withdrew the United States from UNESCO. And the argument is that Trump argued UNESCO was politically biased. It was particularly in the thralls, so Trump argued, of anti-Israeli and anti-American political interests. And the other thing, of course, that we know about Donald Trump is that media policy is one of his big signature tickets. For example, in the same period, we might talk about moves that Donald Trump made to ban TikTok. And we're going to be coming back to that example later on in these series of videos. But the point we're making is that the Trump presidency symbolizes the political importance of media policy. So it's worth knowing that Trump is not the first US president to withdraw America from UNESCO. This actually happened before in the presidency of Ronald Reagan. In 1983, Ronald Reagan similarly withdrew the United States from UNESCO along similar grounds. And there was a strong media policy component within the decision. What the withdrawal was largely motivated by in 1983 was the perception in the Reagan administration that UNESCO was at least sympathetic to the idea that global media flows should be controlled. The argument was made from some circles that what the world needed was a new world information and communication order. This is very often associated with a 1980 UNESCO policy document called the McBride Report, which argued that it was important for global polity that the developing world be allowed to develop its own media industries that would tell its own stories from their own perspectives and with their own needs in mind. And what that meant was that UNESCO was at least sympathetic to the idea that the United States shouldn't be able to flood markets in the developing world with relatively inexpensive Hollywood fare, that the world needed indigenous media industries because that was an important part of full political democratic participation on a global scale. And in essence, the Reagan administration argued that this was an abrogation of the First Amendment. Of course, the First Amendment only exists in America, um, but nevertheless, there was this kind of argument from the Reagan administration that the commitment to freedom of speech, the commitment to be able to send your media products wherever in the world you wanted to, that was an important global principle. And it no longer believed that UNESCO's media policy in particular was amenable to that principle. And therefore, the Reagan administration no longer wished to contribute to UNESCO's mission, because it argued that UNESCO was no longer interested in promoting global cultural exchanges, because UNESCO was interested in stemming the flow of American media throughout the world. Now, there were all kinds of complications to that argument, and many critical media scholars argued that the United States wasn't really interested in promoting global discourse. It was really interested in having its version of reality promoted throughout the world and accepted as the norm. But this is a different argument. We don't have time to go into that at this point. The message to take home from this is that media policy has extremely pointed political relevance. That it isn't really that what we've seen over the last half a century or so, firstly around global television and latterly around social media, is the way that media policy and global political diplomacy quite often go hand in hand. And so, what this does is establishes the importance of looking at media policy as one of the areas where we can really talk about the political significance of media. And so, whatever particular media policy we're talking about and whatever particular media practices we may wish to address, we need to bear this, I suppose, what you might call big story, bigger picture, grand narrative in mind in all of the work that we do.